Have you ever poured your soul into something, only to have someone else put their name on it and throw you away like trash? It's a feeling that hollows you out, a quiet theft that leaves you questioning your own worth. Stick with me, because this is the story of how I took back my soul, my work, and my future from the man who thought he could erase me. If you've ever felt invisible at work, trust me, you're going to want to hear this. Let me know in the comments if this sounds familiar, because it really helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. The email arrived at 4:57 p.m. on a Friday. It had no subject line. That was the first sign. Julian, the founder and my self-proclaimed work bestie, was a man obsessed with optics, with the perfect subject line, the perfect emoji, the perfect everything. An empty subject line from him was the digital equivalent of a hangman's noose. The body of the email was 3 sentences long. It thanked me for my contributions. It informed me that my services as a contractor were no longer required. It wished me the best in my future endeavors. No call, no meeting, no thank you for the 6 years I had spent turning his vague idea into a billion-dollar brand identity. I was sitting at the same cheap IKEA desk I'd assembled myself in our first tiny office, the one that smelled like paint fumes and stale pizza. Now, we were in a sprawling glass and steel temple to his ego in the heart of the city, and I was being dismissed like a software trial that had expired. I looked up from my screen, across the open-plan office, a cathedral of reclaimed wood and exposed brick. Julian was holding court. He was standing near the kombucha taps, laughing with a group of new hires, all of them barely old enough to remember a world without smartphones. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive black t-shirt, the fabric clinging to his gym-sculpted frame. And right over his heart, stitched in perfect, minimalist white thread, was my logo. The logo, the symbol I had sketched on a cocktail napkin during a 3-hour-long brainstorm that he'd almost slept through. The icon that was now on hats, on water bottles, on the glossy sides of delivery vans, on the loading screen of an app used by millions. It was my work, and he was wearing it while he fired me with an email he didn't even have the courage to put his name on. It was signed, simply, the Aura Team. Aura, the name I'd come up with. He caught my eye. He must have seen the blood drain from my face. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture of faux sympathy that was more insulting than a slap. Then he turned back to his audience, his voice carrying across the polished concrete floor. He was telling them a story, one of his favorites, the story of how the Aura logo just came to him. In a dream, a moment of pure divine inspiration, I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck. He wasn't just firing me, he was erasing me. He was retroactively deleting my existence from the company's history. An hour later, his head of HR, a woman named Cynthia whom I'd onboarded myself, came over with a cardboard box. Her smile was tight, her eyes wouldn't meet mine. She said Julian felt my work had been foundational, but that the company was moving in a new creative direction. She said he thought I was, and this was a direct quote, a one-hit wonder. She said it with the clinical detachment of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, a one-hit wonder, the hit that had made him a multi-millionaire, the hit that was paying for the very box she'd just handed me. I calmly placed my laptop, my favorite coffee mug, and a small succulent into the box. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, picked up my box, and walked toward the elevator, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on my back. As the doors slid shut, I saw him. Julian. He was still laughing. It was in that moment, in the silent descent of the elevator, that the shock began to solidify into something else. Something cold, and hard, and clear. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about correction. He had made a mistake, a colossal, legally binding, career-ending mistake. He'd forgotten that in his rush to build his empire on my foundation, he never actually got me to sign over the deed. The first 24 hours were a blur of numb disbelief. I walked the 43 blocks back to my apartment, the cardboard box digging into my hip, the city lights smearing into a watercolor of indifference. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like a museum of my own failure. On my bookshelf, there were design annuals with my logo featured. On my desk, the original framed napkin sketch, a gift from Julian in the early days when he still called me his genius. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I dropped the box by the door and just stood in the dark, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The breakdown wasn't a dramatic, tear-soaked affair. It was quiet, a slow, crushing implosion of my professional identity. I had poured my entire creative being into Aura. I wasn't just a contractor, I was the architect of its visual soul. Every color palette, every font choice, every pixel on that website was a decision I had bled for. I'd worked holidays, weekends, and pulled all-nighters so frequent they had their own line item in my caffeine budget. For what? For a promise, for equity, for a seat at the table that was always just around the corner, always after the next funding round, always after the next big launch. My mind started to rewind, flickering through memories like a corrupted video file. I remembered the very beginning, the two of us in that first office, a glorified closet with a leaky radiator. We had one shared table, and a dream that felt impossibly big. Julian had the charisma, the silver-tongued pitch that could sell sand in a desert. But he had no substance. His ideas were a chaotic mess of buzzwords he'd picked up from tech blogs. He needed a translator, someone to turn his word salad into a tangible, beautiful, desirable reality. That was me. He'd say things like, "We need to be synergistic and disruptive, a paradigm shift in the wellness space." I'd nod, and then I'd go home and spend 72 hours creating a brand guide that made it look like we knew what we were doing. I remembered the night the logo was born. We were at a dive bar after a potential investor had laughed us out of his office. Julian was despondent, ready to quit. He was moaning about how no one got his vision. I took out a pen and started sketching on a cheap, flimsy napkin. I wasn't thinking, I was just feeling. I wanted to capture the essence of what we were supposed to be about: balance, clarity, a single, perfect moment of focus in a chaotic world. I drew a single, unbroken line that formed a stylized A. It was simple, it was elegant, it was perfect. I slid the napkin across the sticky table. Julian stared at it. His eyes, for the first time, lost their usual manic energy and were filled with a kind of awe. He whispered, "That's it. That's the one." He'd hugged me, a genuine desperate hug, and promised me right then and there, "You're not a contractor, Charlotte. You're a founder. We're in this together. Equity, a real partnership," he promised. And I, with the foolish optimism of a true believer, believed him. The memory was so vivid it tasted like stale beer and broken promises. That single sketch became the cornerstone of everything. It dictated the minimalist design of the app, the clean lines of the packaging, even the aesthetic of the office itself. The company wasn't called Aura yet. Julian wanted to call it Zenith or Apex or some other aggressive, masculine tech bro name. I was the one who fought for Aura. I told him our brand shouldn't be about conquering something. It should be about radiating something. He'd resisted. Then he'd seen how the logo and the name clicked together, and he'd presented it to the first seed investors as his own brilliant, holistic vision. It was the first time he stole from me, but I told myself it was for the good of the company. It wasn't about credit. It was about building something together. I thought about Maya, the junior designer I'd hired and mentored. She was brilliant, hungry, and saw the world in grids and hex codes just like I did. I'd protected her from Julian's worst impulses, his last-minute, half-baked ideas that would send the entire team into a weekend-long tailspin. I taught her how to say no to him, how to translate his chaotic demands into workable design briefs. I taught her that good design wasn't just making things pretty, it was about creating a system of logic and beauty. I wondered what would happen to her now. Would she be the next one to have her ideas strip-mined and then be cast aside? The thought filled me with a fresh wave of cold fury. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the culture of erasure he was perfecting. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old colleague, someone who had left Aura a year ago. It was a link to a tech news site. The headline read, "Aura announces Aura Home, a new line of smart home wellness products, capping a $200 million valuation." The article was gushing, filled with quotes from Julian about his unwavering vision and instinctive design sense. And there it was, a gallery of product shots, a sleek white air purifier, a minimalist alarm clock that supposedly woke you with simulated sunlight. And on every single one of them, perfectly placed, was my logo, the one I'd sketched on a napkin, the one that belonged to me. Seeing it on those products I didn't even know existed, was the catalyst. It was the final, brutal violation. He hadn't just fired me. He had fired me on the eve of his greatest triumph, a triumph built entirely on my work. The numbness in my chest cracked, and in its place a resolve as hard and sharp as a diamond began to form. The fog of hurt and betrayal lifted, and I could see the path forward with absolute terrifying clarity. He called me a one-hit wonder. Fine. I was about to show him just how much that one hit was going to cost him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a reckoning. He had forgotten who held the power. I was about to remind him. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out a file I hadn't looked at in years. It was labeled, simply, Aura Minte. People think foresight is about predicting the future. It's not. It's about understanding the present so deeply that you can see the fault lines. It's about knowing that promises are just air, but a paper trail is forever. I was never naive. I was a freelance designer long before I met Julian. I'd been burned before by fast-talking clients with big ideas and empty pockets. I knew the ironclad rule: you never, ever hand over the final files until the contract is signed and the check is cleared. But Aura felt different. It felt like a cause, not a gig. The "we're a family" rhetoric, the shared struggle, the intoxicating promise of being on the ground floor of something revolutionary. I drank the Kool-Aid. I told myself that pushing for a formal work-for-hire agreement right at the beginning would feel transactional, that it would poison the well of creativity and trust we were building. It's a classic trap, and I walked right into it, but with one crucial difference: I left the door unlocked behind me. Julian was a whirlwind of action and chaos. He moved fast, broke things, and lived by the mantra that it was better to ask for forgiveness than permission. This applied to everything from product launches to parking tickets. It also applied to paperwork. In the early days, he was the entire administrative department. He was sloppy. He'd promise contracts and then forget to send them. He'd agree to terms on a handshake and then get distracted by a new shiny object. I knew this, so when the initial flurry of excitement passed and the company started to formalize, I'd gently remind him every few months, "Hey Julian, about that IP transfer agreement for the branding suite?" He'd always wave his hand dismissively. Yes, Charlotte, of course. We'll get to it. You're a founder. Your equity agreement will cover all of that. Don't worry, we're family." But the equity agreement never materialized either. It was always just over the horizon. After a while, my gentle reminders stopped. This is the part viewers will debate. Was it weakness? Was I a fool? Or was it strategy? The truth is, it was a little of both. Part of me was still clinging to the belief that he would do the right thing. But another, colder, more pragmatic part of me recognized the power I was quietly holding. Every day that passed without that signature, the logo's copyright didn't transfer to the company. It remained by default with its creator. With me, it was a secret, silent insurance policy, a kill switch I hoped I'd never have to use. Now, it was time to flip that switch. But I wasn't going to do it alone. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to Maya. I caught her on her way home. I kept it simple. "I've been let go." Her reaction was immediate, a gasp of genuine shock and anger. "What? No, they can't. You are Aura." Her loyalty was a balm on my raw nerves. I told her the one-hit wonder line, and I heard her audibly scoff. "That's insane. He's been trying to get us to replicate your process for months. He calls it bottling the Charlotte magic. We can't do it. There's no magic, just a deep understanding of the brand that only you have." This was the first piece of intel, and it was golden. Julian was already trying to replace me and failing. I asked her to do something for me, something that was a risk for her. "I need you to be my eyes and ears. I'm not asking you to steal anything or break any rules. Just observe. Tell me about the mood. Tell me about his reactions. I need to know what's happening inside." She agreed without a moment's hesitation. She said, "It's the least I can do. You taught me everything." She was my ally, my operative behind enemy lines. My second call was to a man named Arthur Vance, a copyright lawyer who was more shark than man. I had his card taped to the inside of my desk drawer, a relic from a past dispute with a client who thought exposure was a form of payment. Arthur was blunt, expensive, and ruthlessly effective. I laid out the whole story in a calm, even tone. The 6 years of work, the verbal promises of equity, the lack of a signed work-for-hire agreement, the public attribution of my work to Julian, and the termination. I could almost hear him smiling through the phone. He let out a low whistle. "Oh, this is good, Charlotte. This isn't just a slam dunk. This is the whole championship series." He explained the legal reality in beautifully simple terms. Without a written agreement explicitly transferring the copyright, the ownership of the logo, and by extension, the entire visual identity of the brand built upon it, rested with me. Every t-shirt they sold, every ad they ran, every time that logo appeared on a screen, it was an act of infringement. For 6 years. He said, "We're not just going to send a cease and desist, we're going to send them an invoice." This is where my own secret preparations came into play. For years, I had been meticulously documenting everything, not because I was paranoid, but because I am a professional. I had every email, every project brief, every revision history. But I had something more. I had the story. Over the last year, as I felt my position in the company becoming more precarious, I had started a side project. On a private, password-protected website, I had built a case study of the Aura logo. It was a masterclass in brand creation. It had the initial napkin sketch, scanned in high resolution. It had the dozens of rejected concepts, showing the evolution of the idea. It had my handwritten notes on color theory, on the psychological impact of the font I chose, on the geometric principles behind the unbroken line. I had written a nearly 10,000-word essay on the philosophy behind the design, linking it to the core principles of the brand that Julian so eagerly espoused, but never truly understood. This wasn't just a portfolio piece, it was a declaration of authorship. It was irrefutable proof that the logo wasn't a dream or a happy accident. It was the product of intense intellectual labor, my labor. This website was my hidden leverage. It was the bomb I could detonate publicly, exposing Julian's entire founding myth as a lie. The final piece of the plan involved another key figure I had cultivated over the years, Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Aura's biggest enterprise client, a major hotel chain that used our platform for their guest wellness programs. Sterling was an old-school executive, a man who valued integrity and relationships above all else. He and I had always had a direct line of communication. He'd often call me personally, bypassing Julian to discuss the nuances of integrating our brand into his. He respected my work, and more importantly, he respected me. He had once told me in a meeting, "Julian is the sizzle, Charlotte, but you're the steak." He had no idea how right he was. I wouldn't need to poach him. I just needed to make sure he was watching when the curtain was pulled back. The plan was a three-pronged attack. First, the legal strike from Arthur. Second, the internal intelligence from Maya. Third, the potential public detonation of the origin story, which would be aimed directly at people like Mr. Sterling, people who cared about authenticity. For 6 years, I had built Julian's brand in the light. Now, from the shadows, I was going to dismantle his illusion, piece by piece. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring the truth, and the truth had a price tag. Arthur and I spent the weekend calculating it. We researched standard licensing fees for a globally recognized logo. We factored in a premium for its use in a multi-million-dollar ad campaign. We added penalties for unauthorized usage. Then we multiplied it by 6 years. The final number was breathtaking. It was a figure that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It was a number that would force a conversation. On Monday morning, Arthur attached the cease and desist letter and the invoice to an email. He sent it to Julian, the entire board of directors, and their general counsel. Then I sat back, and I waited for the silence to break. The first 24 hours after the email was sent were deafeningly quiet. It was the calm before a storm, the eerie stillness in the air right before a lightning strike. I spent the day trying to act normal. I went to the gym, I bought groceries, I tried to read a book, but my focus was shot. Every 5 minutes, my hand would instinctively reach for my phone, checking for a missed call, a frantic email, a sign that the torpedo had hit its target. Nothing. This, I knew, was part of the dance. Julian's ego was a fortress. His first instinct would be to ignore the threat, to pretend it didn't exist. He would see the email, laugh it off as some pathetic, desperate stunt from a disgruntled contractor, and tell his lawyers to make it go away. He believed his own mythology, the one where he was the genius, and I was just a footnote. That was his weakness. He was playing checkers, moving his pieces with loud, arrogant slams. I was playing chess, and my opening move was designed to be quiet, almost invisible, forcing him to make a mistake. The first crack in the silence came from Maya. At 7 p.m. on Monday, she sent me a single text message. "He's in the glass conference room with 3 lawyers. He is not smiling." The message was a shot of adrenaline. It was happening. The quiet panic was setting in. I could picture the scene perfectly. Julian pacing back and forth in that fishbowl of an office, his usual confident swagger gone, replaced by a tight, coiled anger. The lawyers, a trio of expensive suits, would be patiently explaining the grim reality of copyright law. They would be telling him that the piece of paper he'd forgotten about, the one he'd dismissed as unimportant, was in fact the single most valuable document in his entire company, and he didn't have it. Later that night, Maya called, her voice a hushed whisper. She was in a bathroom stall, the acoustics tinny and fraught with tension. She said the entire executive floor was a ghost town, except for the conference room. She'd walked past to get her water bottle and had heard Julian shouting. His voice was raw, furious. He was yelling, "How is this possible? Just fix it. I paid her." Maya said one of the lawyers, a calm, older woman, had replied in a voice too low to hear, but Julian's response was crystal clear. "What do you mean we can't use it? It's on everything. It's on the new product line. We're shipping next month." Maya's report was more satisfying than I could have imagined. His panic was beautiful. He was trapped. The logo wasn't just a design, it was the entire operating system of his brand. Removing it would be like trying to rip the DNA out of a living creature. The cost of rebranding, reshooting campaigns, remanufacturing merchandise, and pulping all existing packaging would be catastrophic. It would be an admission of failure on a scale that would spook investors and delight their competitors. He was beginning to understand that he didn't just have a legal problem, he had an existential one. The next morning, the official response came, not from Julian, but from Aura's head of legal. It was a masterpiece of corporate bluster. The email was condescending, dismissive, and dripping with thinly veiled threats. It called my claim baseless and opportunistic. It stated that my long-term contractor relationship implied a work-for-hire arrangement. It mentioned my receipt of regular payments as proof of this implied agreement. It ended by suggesting that if I pursued this frivolous claim, Aura would have no choice but to file a countersuit for harassment and damages to their business. Arthur, my lawyer, laughed out loud when I read it to him. He said, "Ah, the intimidation letter. This is phase 2. It's a scare tactic designed for amateurs. They know they're in trouble. Implied agreements in copyright are notoriously difficult to prove, especially when the creator is an independent contractor, not an employee. Your payments were for your time and labor, not for the transfer of intellectual property rights. They have nothing." He drafted a reply that was short, cold, and brutal. It simply stated, "We acknowledge receipt of your letter. Our position remains unchanged. All unauthorized use of my client's intellectual property must cease immediately. The invoice for past licensing fees is now 24 hours past due, and interest is beginning to accrue. We are prepared to file for a temporary restraining order to halt your infringing activities by the close of business on Friday." That was the move that broke the dam. The threat of a TRO was real. It meant we could go to a judge and have them legally forbid Aura from using the logo on anything, their website, their app, their marketing, while the case was being litigated. It would be a public, humiliating, and immediate shutdown of their brand. Julian couldn't hide from that. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. It was him. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. Then the texts started. "Charlotte, we need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Call me. Let's be reasonable. You can't do this to us, to me." The tone shifted from casual to pleading to demanding in the space of 15 minutes. I watched the messages pile up, a quiet satisfaction spreading through me. For 6 years, I had waited for his calls, for his feedback, for his approval. Now he was desperate for mine. The silence was my weapon now. Every hour I didn't respond, his panic would mount, the pressure would build inside that glass fortress. He was learning a lesson I had learned long ago. The person who controls the communication, controls the situation. And for the first time in our long and storied history, I was in complete control. The silent takeover was well underway. He just didn't realize he had already lost. The tipping point didn't come from a courtroom. It came from a single, well-placed phone call. On Thursday, with our deadline for filing the restraining order looming, I decided it was time to light the second fuse. I called Mr. Sterling. I didn't mention the lawsuit or the cease and desist. I framed it as a matter of professional courtesy and due diligence. I said, "Mr. Sterling, I'm calling you today because I'm no longer with Aura, and I wanted to clarify the intellectual property status of some of the branding elements we developed for your hotel integration." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Charlotte, it's good to hear your voice. I was sorry to hear you'd left. Julian told me you were pursuing other opportunities." I let that lie hang in the air for a moment. Then I said, "That's one way to put it. The reason I'm calling is that the core logo, the Aura A, is my copyrighted work, and there appears to be a dispute over its licensing. As your brand is currently using it, I felt it was my ethical duty to inform you directly." Sterling was sharp. He didn't need a detailed explanation. He read between the lines instantly. He let out a long, slow sigh. "I see. So the foundation isn't quite as solid as it looks. Let me make some inquiries, Charlotte. Thank you for your professionalism. We'll be in touch." That was it. I had planted the seed of doubt in the most fertile ground possible. The fallout was faster and more spectacular than I could have hoped. An hour later, a story dropped on a major tech industry blog. The headline was devastating: "Brand Identity Crisis at Aura, as founder's ownership of iconic logo is disputed." Someone had leaked the story. It wasn't me, and it wasn't Arthur. It was almost certainly someone from Sterling's camp, a strategic leak designed to protect their own interests and put pressure on Julian. The article was brutal. It quoted anonymous sources within Aura who confirmed the legal dispute. It mentioned the threat of a TRO. It questioned the entire origin story that Julian had been dining out on for years. And then, the kill shot. It included a quote from a spokesperson for Sterling's hotel group. "We take intellectual property and brand integrity very seriously. We are watching this situation closely and reevaluating our partnership with Aura, pending a swift and ethical resolution." Julian's biggest client had just put him on public notice. The sizzle was gone. Now everyone was questioning the stake. The client exodus began. It was a slow trickle at first, then a flood. Sterling's public statement gave other clients the cover they needed. Aura's platform was good, but it wasn't irreplaceable. What was irreplaceable was brand safety. No corporation wants to be associated with a public, messy fight over stolen intellectual property. It's toxic. Maya was my feed, sending me updates in a flurry of texts. A major retail partner just paused their upcoming campaign. The German distributor is asking for a call with legal. Everyone is freaking out. She told me Julian had called an all-hands meeting. He tried to project calm, telling everyone it was a minor contractual dispute that was being blown out of proportion by a bitter ex-contractor. But his hands were shaking. He looked pale and haggard. Nobody was buying it. The culture of absolute belief he had so carefully cultivated was crumbling. That's when he made his desperate counter. He called me, and this time, I answered. His voice was a strange cocktail of false bonhomie and raw desperation. "Charlotte, thank God. Listen, this has all gone too far. Let's sit down, just the two of us. The lawyers are making everything messy." I told him calmly, "I'm happy to meet Julian, as long as my lawyer is present." His frustration flared. No lawyers, just you and me. Like the old days." He was trying to appeal to a friendship he himself had incinerated. When I didn't respond, he switched tactics. He offered me everything he'd ever promised. The equity, a huge salary, more than I could have imagined, a C-suite title, Chief Creative Officer. How does that sound? You can lead the whole design division. Your name on the door. He was offering me the keys to a kingdom that was on fire. I let him finish. I let the silence stretch out. Then I said, "Julian, you had 6 years to offer me that. The time for that conversation is over. Now we talk about the invoice." He snapped. His voice turned ugly, vicious. "You're trying to destroy me. After everything I've done for you. I gave you a chance when you were nobody. I made you. The mask was completely off. This was the real Julian, the one who saw me not as a partner, but as an asset he owned." I replied, in a voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake. "No, Julian, you didn't make me. I made you, and you seem to have forgotten that. I have a meeting with my lawyer to finalize the court filing. You have until 5 p.m. to instruct your counsel to accept our terms." Then I hung up. The power had shifted. It was no longer his to give, it was mine to take. The final meeting took place not in his gleaming office, but in the neutral territory of Arthur's conference room. The polished mahogany table felt like a battlefield. Julian was there with his lead counsel, the woman with the calm voice. He looked terrible. The designer t-shirt was wrinkled, his face was ashen, and the confident energy he usually radiated had been replaced by a sullen, petulant gloom. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the grain of the wood on the table. Arthur led the conversation, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. He laid out the terms, which were no longer just about the past. We weren't there to destroy Aura. That was never the point. We were there to correct the balance of power. The invoice for the 6 years of retroactive licensing fees was non-negotiable. It would be paid in full within 30 days. That was the price for his past sins. But for the future, we offered him a choice. Option A. He could cease and desist all use of the logo and the associated brand identity immediately. This would, as we all knew, effectively be a death sentence for the company. Option B. He could continue to use the logo, but under a new, ironclad licensing agreement. This agreement would grant Aura the right to use the logo in exchange for a perpetual royalty, a percentage of the company's net revenue, not profit, which can be manipulated, but top-line revenue. The agreement would also give me, the creator, final say on any major new applications of the brand identity. I would have veto power. In essence, he could keep his company, but I would be his permanent, highly paid, and very powerful creative conscience. Julian's lawyer read the terms, her face impassive. She slid the document over to him. He scanned it, his jaw tightening with every line. When he got to the part about my veto power, he finally looked up at me. His eyes were burning with a hateful fire. He said, in a low, seething voice, "This is extortion." Arthur leaned forward slightly. "No, Mr. Vance, this is a standard intellectual property licensing deal. It's what you should have offered my client 6 years ago. It's the cost of doing business. The choice is yours." Julian looked from the document to his lawyer, then back to me. He was trapped. He knew it. The rage in his eyes slowly curdled into a kind of dead, hollow resignation. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he signed his name. He didn't say another word. He just stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the room, a king dethroned in a quiet room on a Tuesday afternoon. The news of his departure came 2 months later. It was delivered fittingly in a text from Maya. Board just pushed him out. Sterling's group threatened to pull their new contract if he stayed. They installed an interim CEO. He's gone. It happened off-screen. A quiet execution that I had no direct hand in. My strategy had created the conditions for his failure. His own arrogance and incompetence did the rest. He wasn't defeated by my revenge. He was defeated by the consequences of his own actions. My vindication wasn't in his fall. It was in my rise. Maya quit the next day. She was the first employee of my new venture, a small independent branding studio. We started with one major client, Mr. Sterling's hotel group, who had hired us to oversee their entire brand portfolio. The first check from Aura, the one for the retroactive fees, arrived by courier. The number was obscene. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deposited it. It wasn't about the money. It was about the acknowledgement. It was the full stop at the end of a very long and painful sentence. My new office is small, but it's mine. It has a big window that lets in the afternoon light. There's no reclaimed wood or kombucha on tap. It just smells like coffee and possibility. On the wall there's a simple frame. Inside it is not the napkin sketch. That's in a safe deposit box. Inside this frame is a printout of the email he sent me, the one with no subject line. It's a reminder, not of the betrayal, but of the moment the power shifted. The moment I stopped being a one-hit wonder and started being the one who owned the master recording. So, what's the moral of this story? It's not just about copyright law or the fine print in a contract. It's about knowing your value, even when the world, or at least the loudest person in your world, tells you that you have none. For years, I let my worth be defined by someone else's promises. I waited for a seat at a table that was never going to be offered to me. The betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to do something I should have done long ago: build my own table. The greatest power you have is the one you create for yourself. Your talent, your integrity, your relationships, those are assets that no one can take from you unless you let them. Don't wait for them to recognize your genius. Document it, protect it, and if you have to, invoice for it. This whole experience taught me that your work is your legacy, and you are its only true guardian. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued, overlooked, or erased in your own career, do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know that these stories matter. Leave a comment below and share a time you had to stand up for your own worth. I read every single one, and your stories give me strength. And of course, if you want to hear more stories about turning injustice into vindication, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You never know when you'll need a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Thank you for listening.